Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me. And I'm very glad today that for the second time, my guest is Shayne Swenson. He's an Orthodox Christian, and he's also a tattoo artist. Hey, God bless you.
Correct.
Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Last time we talked, I omitted something. You're an iconographer too. Sorry.
Right.
So
Sorry.
last time, yeah, yeah, behind you. So last time we talked, we mainly talked about Eastern Orthodox iconography, which you do as well. Yeah. Are most of those icons are those yours back there, or?
Yeah, this is just my work area, my easel, but yeah, these are all finished or half finished, and these are commissions and whatnot that I usually, I'll have together. But
Well, you do panel icons. Do you do the big ones too, the larger?
yeah, I do here and there. I mostly do panel icons, but I've been moving more towards into murals, wall paintings. I don't want to frescoes. It's not true fresco. I don't go and do all the actual fresco, but mural, that sort of thing. Mostly on canvas, and then it's installed that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And so today, because last time we talked, I think we talked just briefly about your work as a tattoo artist, and then I got a bunch of questions, especially from Christians and Catholics about not so much asking me about tattooing from a Christian point of view, but just sort of making these statements about, well, tattooing is wrong. As a Christian, you shouldn't get tattoos. You shouldn't be a tattoo artist. And I was just interested in exploring that a little bit.
Right.
Honestly, and I have to say, I'm not impartial, because I have a couple of, I have more than a couple, but I have some tattoos, but they're old. They're over 20 years old, and I'm kind of ambivalent. I don't know. I see, when I read the arguments on both sides of tattooing from a Christian point of view, I can see both arguments. And I went online and I read Roman Catholics pro and con tattooing. I would say they were more, I wouldn't say they were in the middle. They were leaning more towards no tattoos.
Right.
But they tended to talk about what the subject matter of the tattoo was and what was the intention of getting the tattoo. Now I looked at some Orthodox perspectives, and they tended to be much more against it.
Right.
Tattoo.
Yeah, that's an understatement for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I did go to the Bible.
Right. So good place to start.
Yeah, that's right. To start. I think I first went online and started reading some opinions, but they oftentimes, not oftentimes, they always reference certain Bible passages. So these were the two that get cited all the time. So this is Leviticus 19. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, neither shall you make in yourselves any figures or marks. I am the Lord. So that was often cited as evidence that God, well, Leviticus, that's Old Testament, is against tattooing. And then I said, I don't know if you're familiar with this. I read some arguments making the point that passage specifically condemned a certain type of cutting of the flesh that was associated with, I don't know what you'd call it, ceremonial rites of the dead. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah. 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 This is a very simple it's a simple and a complex topic, because like a lot of things that aren't, I guess, dogmatic, people tend to take the reins of whatever position that they want to push, and they run as far as they can in the direction they want things to go. So yeah, I mean, with that verse specifically, and I'll caveat all this by saying, just right off the bat, I'm not an evangelist for tattooing in any way. I'm not pro-tattooing. I'm not anti-tattooing when it comes to what the personal decisions that people make regarding that issue. Just like I'm not pro-cosmetic surgery or anti-cosmetic surgery, and I'm not pro-makeup, anti-makeup, whatever. I'm not for or against it necessarily. That's something that I think people need to talk about with their spiritual father, spiritual director, and they need to come to a decision based upon their own conscience and what they feel, where they feel God is leading them with that. Because, for example, with this verse in Leviticus you're talking about, oftentimes I hear, I'm not going to say anything about Baptists or Protestants. I know you have some people that of those traditions that listen and watch. That's not really the area I'm talking about here. I'm talking more about Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. There seems to be oftentimes in biblical exegesis within both the Catholic and the Orthodox Church a real heavy focus on context. We don't just pull a verse and say, what does this mean to me? There is a personal application that comes along, obviously, but it's less about how does this make me feel? What does this have to say to my life? There is an aspect of that, but the first things first is, what is the context? What was this trying to say to the people who were reading this or implementing this within their life in the original context? What did the author really mean? And to get more to the root of it, what does this actually mean? Does it, in Leviticus, were they condemning modern tattooing? Well, obviously not, because it wasn't around. The context is totally different, okay? What I do in my secular profession, no one comes in there and says, hey, Shayne, I want you to mark my body because I'm this weird pagan, and I'm doing this because I'm, for whatever reason. That never happens. I'm sure there are people out there that do that because, as we'll probably talk about as this conversation progresses, the tattoo industry can be a little weird, and it attracts amazing artists and amazing people. And it also attracts a lot of weirdos and degenerates. I'll be honest. I've been in the industry for 17 years and I've had, plenty of exposure to this stuff. So that being said, when it comes down to this verse in Leviticus, you can make a case for it, and you can make a solid case that this is what this is commanding. You shouldn't get a tattoo because of this verse. But I would highly suggest not building your whole case around that verse, because contextually, that's not what it's talking about. You can construe it to say that, and that's totally valid. But at the end of the day, you're not going to convince anyone to not get a tattoo because there's some prescription and like the Levitical, I forget the exact heady biblical term, but all in all, that's not really the context that it's speaking about. I also can't come in and say, well, that's not what that means, so therefore, you should just disregard it. I do believe I'm no biblical scholar, but there's also other prescriptions about cutting your beard and all these other kind of strange things for us. So
it's a difficult needle to thread, because
was that pun intended?
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, but because when you start talking about context in terms of scripture, I'm not saying you're doing this, but in the space that I move in sometimes, which is the LGBT space, especially those who identify or who still hold on to some sort of Christian faith or tradition, they talk about context, saying, well, the prohibitions against cutting beards, or certain prescriptions about which pertain to the death penalty. In the Old Testament, they say, well, you got to look at the context, and then vis-a-vis the context in terms of prohibitions against homosexuality and all that. It's difficult when you go down that road.
It is. No, you're 100% correct, which is why I say I'm not an evangelist for tattooing, because there are I'll just explain my personal view right out of the gate. I've been a tattoo artist for 17 years. I was a tattoo artist before I was Russian Orthodox. Wow. And it's definitely something I've thought about moving away from. I enjoy it. It's given me amazing things. It's an amazing industry full of creative people, amazing people. I mean, it really is. But at the end of the day, I would be lying if I said I didn't have moral conflictions that I've been working through for the last few years. And personally, what do I tell my kids? Don't get a tattoo. At least wait till you're 25. Don't get a tattoo. Does that mean that I'm a person that says tattooing is wrong in every instance? No, because if I was, I would have to morally completely separate myself from it and walk away. I don't think that it is morally wrong. Like if you're in a homosexual relationship, I think as far as degrees about what is more injurious to the soul, I think that's a little higher up than someone that gets a tattoo of Taz on their ankle or something like that. So it all boils down to, this is something people need to think about for themselves, and they need to, what do all the Desert Fathers say about condemning someone else for doing something? You know what I mean? I mean, again, you can take that and say, well, yeah, the people that push the LGBT whatever stuff do that, and I agree. But again, I think it's kind of apples and oranges, not to counter signal you, but I think it's kind of apples and oranges as far as morally speaking what's going on. So the advice I got from my confessor, spiritual father, was that I need to eventually leave the tattoo industry. Wow. But it's not, I mean, he said that's, especially if you want to be an iconographer, okay, that's something you need to do, but it needs to be something that God clears the way for. And I have 5 children. And what I was told by my spiritual father, who I listened to, at least I tried to, he said it would probably be at this point in your life a greater sin to just drop the ball and stop tattooing and just be high and dry with no real way to provide for your family than to continue tattooing and paint your iconography and just see where God leads you out of it. And that's sort of what I've gotten from a lot of priests, the ones that'll talk about it. A lot of priests won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, and I've asked several priests, what do you think about my secular job? And a lot of Orthodox priests, they don't want to give advice because I'm not, I'm not in their parish. They're not responsible for me. So I understand the wisdom in that. But again, I'm just like other people. I'm personally working through the morality of it, because from my experience, it's people that get tattooed now, it's not like it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago. The people who get tattooed now are, I mean, this might scandalize some people, but I did a bunch of tattoos on an SSPX priest recently, and I've tattooed several Catholic priests, no Orthodox priests just yet, but I've had a few Orthodox priests ask me to tattoo them. But yeah, there's this SSPX priest who I will not name for obvious reasons, who I'm friends with, and he got a Saint Michael tattoo. I won't say where, but he got a Saint Michael tattoo with I think there's the Saint Michael prayer. You say
I've got one too as well.
On your upper arm right here?
Upper arm.
Okay. Yeah, I did. His was a little bit bigger, but I did like the Saint Michael prayer in Latin with it, and he sort of interpreted it like the pain he went through, he was gonna, experience his redemptive suffering for his other brother who's outside of the church, and he was kind of telling me about that, which I understood. And
that sounds familiar.
Familiar?
I'll say why. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's what he told me. And when I worked in Seattle years ago, one of the guys I worked with, he was a Christian guy too, and he tattooed a Catholic, I think it was like a transitional deacon or a seminarian, and he sort of had the same logic that, he didn't have any moral issue with it, and he was doing it for that reason, on top of just getting the tattoo he wanted. So
yeah, I mean, if a tattoo is in an inconspicuous place, nobody knows that they have it. So nobody would ever know. This is from the Corinthians 1, chapter 6. Or, I don't know, this is kind of a clunky translation. It might be Dewey Reams, but I don't know, I like it. Or know you not that your members are the temple of the Holy Ghost, who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own. For you are bought with a great price. Glorify and bear God in your body. So that's the other Bible scripture passage that is often cited. A lot of people, I guess, paraphrase that as, you're a temple. Your body is a temple
Right.
of God. So
what I usually say is, okay, then maybe you shouldn't eat 5 Big Macs as well.
True.
Like maybe guzzling 2 liters of Coke is probably, again, it boils down to the degrees here. Like, okay, well, I don't know. This is a rough, challenging issue. People listening to this aren't going to come out with, at the end, you listen to the whole thing, at the end, you're not going to come out with like a solid answer, like, okay, it's good, or okay, it's bad, because personally, I don't have any advice. You would not believe how many emails and messages I've gotten over the years from people either wanting me to tattoo them because, other Orthodox or Catholic people wanting me to tattoo them because they want Orthodox or Roman Catholic imagery, and they want someone who's familiar with it, and I will, depending on what it is. I won't tattoo iconography on anyone because, I have personal reasons why I won't do that, and I was forbidden by my spiritual father to do it.
What do you mean iconography? Like Eastern iconography?
Right. Orthodox iconography, I will not tattoo on anyone, just out of obedience. I keep my own personal opinion out of it, out of obedience. And then when you get a blessing from a hierarch to paint an icon, I already get comments. I had a Russian Orthodox priest, who I'm not going to name, tell another priest that I've done iconography for that my iconography was an abomination because I'm a tattoo artist, which is, yeah, it's like, okay, bud, whatever. I guess it's not a real icon because I'm not perfect, or I don't know. But so yeah, I've gotten all kinds of comments over the years, and I've gotten a lot of people who want me to come out as, again, an evangelist or an apologist for tattooing, and I tend to like to stay in the middle as far as my personal opinion goes, because, for example, I got an email during Lent from a young man who wanted me to give him like a detailed explanation as to why it's okay or not okay to get a tattoo as an Orthodox Christian. And just like a lot of clergy don't want to give me life advice, that, I'm not their responsibility, so they're not going to give me life advice. I tend not to give people spiritual guidance because I'm not a spiritual director, and this falls within that realm, so I don't know. It's a hairy issue, and it's something that, like, I have actually a quote that Jimmy Akin, I'm sure everyone watching knows who Jimmy Akin is. He's an apologist for Catholic Answers. There's a quote that he wrote that I think 80% encapsulates my own personal opinion about tattooing. It's real quick, I'll read it.
Okay.
He says, "There is no reason why one cannot color one's skin, which is what tattooing amounts to. One can apply color to one's skin by makeup, as is common among women, magic markers, as is common among children, press-on tattoos, as are common in Cracker Jack boxes, or with real tattoos. The mere fact that the ink goes into the skin in the latter case does not create a fundamental moral difference." So I'd say 80% of the way I would agree with Jimmy on this. I had an Orthodox priest who was asking me questions about tattooing. He wasn't being a jerk. He was kind of being provocative with some of the questions, but his intentions weren't to be rude. And he was asking me questions and how I can rectify it morally in my own mind, tattooing someone and then painting an icon for the church. And I know for a fact that his wife has had some cosmetic surgery. And so I had asked him, how do you rectify your wife being the matushka at the parish, getting, even though it was minor, getting, having her temple modified because of vanity? And he got upset, but we took it down a notch. This was a couple years ago. But to me, it kind of falls within that same realm. Like, there are situations where cosmetic surgery is warranted, and there are situations where you can put on makeup and be fine, but you can take it to excess. And I think that's where the argument goes, is that what is, like, for example, if someone gets a tattoo like you have of St. Michael, or they get a tattoo of a cross or whatever, and then they go and decide, okay, now I'm going to get a tattoo on my face. Okay, well, what, we have a degree of excess. Just like I'm going to have a Big Mac with my buddy, but I'm now going to have 9 Big Macs because I have a problem with excess or addiction or whatever. So it's a cauldron of what ifs and personal inclinations. And it's a messy subject because it's hard to answer from a traditional perspective, because it's sort of a peripheral modern moral issue that's now become a major issue because it's so popular. And the church, I would side with the church 9 times out of 10. And with this issue, I would say, if your parish priest or your spiritual father, spiritual director tells you not to get a tattoo, then it's going to spiritually benefit you to not get a tattoo.
Yeah.
Because obedience is more important than anything in the spiritual life. So it's gonna be better for you personally to not get that tattoo. So, but if you don't have a problem with it morally, and you don't have an issue with it, you've prayed about it, and your spiritual father says, yeah, I mean, you're getting an Orthodox cross on your shoulder, I don't see an issue with that. I don't either, so I don't know. Again, I'm not giving definitive answers, and I'm sure people are already, is outraged.
I don't think there is a definitive answer, so that's a good answer.
Right.
It's interesting you said to your children, don't get a tattoo. Well, you said, you qualified it maybe to later, because I mean, none of mine except this one is conspicuous. None of the 5 tattoos I have. So people have asked me, and what I say, and I don't cite any moral or spiritual or religious reasons. I just say, you're going to have to look at that thing the rest of your life.
Right. Right. Do you want to wear a pair of jeans you picked out when you were 18, when you're 50? I mean, and people make decisions on tattoos that easily, or that without as much thought. I mean, now people aren't as flippant about it now. I mean, the kind of work I do black and gray realism. So I do a lot of portraits of family members. I do a lot of Catholic imagery. And I generally do large scale work. I'll do sleeves, big stuff, and people tend to think through stuff a little more. Also the standard, the quality of tattooing is now, the bar is really high now. Oh, yeah. So it's really blossomed. I've been lucky enough to be a tattoo artist during what would be considered an artistic renaissance in the medium of tattooing. It's just an explosion of talent, and it's not, there are still the crusty, cliche old biker type, or like, you ever seen that movie Son-in-Law? Do you remember with Pauly Shore?
No.
You ever seen it? Oh, it's got Pauly Shore and I forget her name, but anyway, there's a scene where they're in a tattoo shop, and it's the cliche, like, weirdo tattoo guy, and like they're picking it off the wall. That's not really how tattooing is these days. For example, like the tattoo studio that I work in, we work in it's a downtown historic building, and our neighbors are all like attorneys, accountants, all professionals. And so we tend to cater to we have a lot of blue collar clientele, but we have a lot of white collar.
Yeah. Tattooing is mainstream now. Yeah,
absolutely. And so with that, that kind of leads into what I was going to say about, the counterculture has become the culture. There is no counterculture. The counterculture is, I hate the term conservatism because it's so stupid and it doesn't mean anything. But for argument's sake, conservatism is like not having a bunch of tattoos is now countercultural or whatever. And I understand why people embrace that or whatever. But tattooing is mainstream, just like going to get your hair colored or going I don't know, going to the eye doctor. Maybe it's not as much of a necessity, but it is.
I want to get into this because I mean, the question of whether or not to get a tattoo is important, but I think the more fundamental question is why people get a tattoo or want to get a tattoo in the first place.
Good point. Good point.
Because I think that's more revealing. In my book, I always on my podcast I plug my book. In my book, one of the things I was really interested in is the idea of, especially from a male point of view. I don't think women have this to a certain degree, but it takes different forms. In my book, I was interested in male initiation, if you want to call it rites, or male, yeah. So I did a little research. Well, I didn't do research. I had to kind of I had to go back at my old research and kind of group it together again. So here's some different male initiation rites that there took place or still do. Mainly this type of what I'm referring to here are they have to do with like indigenous cultures. So like in Papua New Guinea, they have something called crocodile scarification. So it's really, I find this stuff very interesting. So any kind of like body morphism or modification. So it's a type of scarring where it does tend to mimic the scales of a crocodile. So this is a male initiation rite in Papua New Guinea. I remember when, as an aside real quick, I remember when I got my tattoos, I know, like 30 years ago, there was kind of this thing about scarification that was just scary. So I don't know if that survived. I don't know.
It's survived and developed, and I bet you all the stuff you're going to talk about has been adapted and modernized into the body modification realm. Okay. And not to interrupt or take you off the track you're on, but there is a distinct cultural line within the tattoo industry between body modification and tattooing. Okay. Like the piercing body modification industry has a totally different, and not to offend anyone, but it's a totally different ethos than the tattoo industry. Yeah. And it's sort of where a lot of the weird stuff goes on, like where people remove body parts, and everyone thinks that that's tattoo industry, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's connected, but anyway. Continue.
Yeah. 30. I want to talk about this with you. 30 years ago, that was they were kind of in the same space back then.
Right.
But I know, I agree with you. And then there's Amazonian indigenous groups that pierce their lips as a rite of passage into manhood. Forehead scarification among the Dikan clans in southern Sudan. Facial tattoos in New Zealand amongst the Maori. I've always found. Are Maori tattoos, are they popular? That style of tattoos?
Yes, I have a friend of mine. He travels up here from Hawaii, and he does that style of tattooing, and he has his whole face tattooed and whatnot. Obviously, in that part of the world, it's still profoundly important because it's a cultural thing. But you do have some white people that get it.
I was going to ask you, are people that aren't Maori or have no connection to like Maori culture, do they?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I can't speak to say whether or not that's something that those cultures really appreciate, because I know that there are some people who don't like that, but I know that there are a lot of people from those various cultures who will tattoo outsiders with a lot of that imagery. So it's kind of like, well, if it was a big deal, I don't think that they would do it. But again, it's a controversial thing. So
yeah. A lot of my experience is 30 years old, but it seems like there's like a lot in tattooing aesthetics. It seems like there's a lot of like cultural appropriation, just like in the tribal type of tattoos.
Yeah.
I mean, I see Caucasian or European Anglo people with more tribal type of tattoos that you might associate with a different kind of culture. So there's a lot of.
It's interesting because for example, traditional Japanese tattooing, irezumi or whatever the name you want to use for it. with the dragons and then the wind bars, the black wind bars. I do some of that stuff too, some more of the larger scale stuff. And a really interesting thing when you talk about, I don't know if I'd say cultural appropriation.
Well,
but I would say
I only use
I know how you're using it, but I mean, there is that. I know you're not being a pink-haired SJW. I know that, but there is a lot of that. But the one thing I think is interesting is when that kind of cultural tattooing makes its way into the mainstream tattoo industry, it inspires everyone, and it kind of gets passed around in a very organic way. I'll just say real quick. So if you go to Japan, there are a lot of tattooers in Japan who do traditional Japanese tattooing with all of the Japanese tattoo motifs that go all the way back to Shinto religion and woodblock prints. And it's a very culturally sacred, specific thing. And of course, Americans glammed onto it, and we brought that over here and kind of made it our own thing. But in Japan, they also love traditional American tattooing, which is like anyone that's watching that's familiar with tattooing will know who Sailor Jerry is. Or like 10, 15 years ago, those like goofy shirt, Ed Hardy, remember that brand?
Very well.
That had all like that was, I'm not going to go into the business dealings there between Don Ed Hardy and whatever his name is, the guy that did it. But all of those images were actually drawings and pieces of flash. Flash is like when you go into a tattoo shop and you see all the different designs on the wall. That's called flash. That's the term for it. Those are all, when you saw on those t-shirts, those were all designs that were drawn by Don Ed Hardy, who is, I would say, probably, apart from Sailor Jerry, the single most important American tattooer of the last 100 years. He's still living too. And he owns Tattoo City, where you're at in San Francisco. You probably know who I'm talking about. He's a very well person. Yeah, very well known in San Francisco and throughout the tattoo world, very well respected. But if you go to Japan, there's a lot of people that do their style of tattooing, but there's also a ton of people in Japan who have adopted and want to do American style tattooing. And so, like, for example, when kanjis were really popular, the Japanese letters, Japanese writing, everyone had one of those. Americans would get that. They still have them. Yeah, people still do it. An American would get something like strength, or I've tattooed literally a gazillion of those on people. Well, in Japan, they like to get things like banners in their tattoos with American phrases.
Wow.
But it's really funny because a lot of the times it's just gibberish. Like it's like red burrito or something. It's that crazy, and it's that out there. But the shape of the letters met the aesthetic of the overall design, so they just did it. So anyway, yeah, there's definitely a cross-cultural exchange going on artistically between all these various styles of tattooing. And once it gets adopted by the greater tattoo community, organically it just develops and people run with it. And that's one of the beautiful things about tattooing that I appreciate. And there's still a lot of people who, like you were talking about rites of passage, or I'll have people come to me that want to get Viking themed tattoos. Yep. Because that's really popular right now. They want, really? I think part of it, I think a lot of it has to do with people are starving for some kind of connection with their roots. They don't want to be these like deracinated people who are atomized into their own like individual, there's no connection to a greater community oftentimes in modernity. And so by getting a tattoo like that, where let's say you have Scandinavian origin and you get, even if it's something like totally Hollywood, like Thor and, kind of cookie cutter stuff with some runes or something, that's still a way for some of these people to connect with their roots in a way that they're allowed to, because in other ways, culturally, that's kind of taboo, and you can be called certain names, for wanting to do that. So that's sort of a culturally an acceptable way to express that without being cast as some terrible person. And that includes every single group. If you want to go by identity, there's imagery in the modern tattoo industry that certain groups of people get tattooed on them because it symbolizes things that are important to them.
Yeah, this supports my theory. So
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Which I'll get
I
into.
agree with you 100%. You know, it's true.
Yeah, the thing about cultural transference or sharing, yeah, I think it makes art richer. I mean, if you, because like the example that always pops in my head were the Impressionists were very much influenced by Japanese art, because at that time Japan was sort of opening up after being locked down for so long, and a lot of the prints were going to Europe, and Van Gogh's a good example, and Whistler's another good example. And I know that I use that term cultural appropriation. It's just because I don't know. I guess it's
well, there's no other term really.
It's a buzzword. But I mean, like just as an aside, like just recently, Gwen Stefani, somebody tried to kind of take her to task for something she'd done a long time ago, and she was very influenced by Japanese culture, and she said it's a homage more than anything else.
Right.
Then
yeah, no one in the tattoo industry ever does anything to be disrespectful. Like I wouldn't do like, you know, draw something in a traditional Japanese style because I was being a racist. That's just stupid, you know, like, and it's probably the same. Gwen Stefani didn't do what she did because she hates Asian people. That's the height of stupidity. And that's kind of where we're at in some, you know, facets of our culture. Fortunately, I always forget about your academic background whenever we talk, and I'm like, oh yeah,
it's not much, you know.
Well, I know.
I mean, I always tell people my degree is in art history, so it's.
I mean, that's not, you know.
If I get into philosophy or theology, I'm pushing myself to the limit to understand this.
I know enough about that to make people think I know what I'm talking about, but when I talk to anybody that knows what they're talking about, I sound like a room temperature IQ.
No, you fake it very well. I can't even do that. So
fake it is the good
and then, and then a couple other examples. I was talking about initiation rites. Was I can never pronounce the Satare Maui people in Brazil. Is that they will how they do it? They have these sort of mittens made of reeds, and they sort of weave into that live fire ants. So young men, as an initiation rite, have to put these on and be stung multiple times. That was interesting to me, because I think it has certain allusions to tattooing. And then the other, so that's why I left that. So proving oneself and demonstrating to others the ability to withstand physical pain is something that all of these, I would say, have in common. And then they also have, except I don't know about the fire ants, whether that leaves some sort of permanent mark. I would assume it leaves something, some sort of scar.
Probably.
But yeah, there's something in all of these that it leaves a permanent record that you have gone through this trial of pain.
Right.
And I have to say, people that haven't had tattoos, pain, it is very painful. I would say it feels like the worst burn you've ever had.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. That's why I don't get tattooed anymore.
Oh my God. I can't imagine. See, I was in my 20s, and you can do stuff when you're young in your 20s that physically that I can't. So I couldn't imagine doing it now. It just hurt really bad. And I have to say, it was when the needle, you know, punctured the skin, that's painful. But a lot of times it was like the wiping and the touching, and it was like, you know.
Nowadays I use lidocaine when I tattoo people. I have a spray I use. I tend to, it keeps things, you know, down to a dull roar. Well, I'll tattoo somebody for 4, 5, 6 hours.
Is that wimping out though?
No. No, it's not. That whole aspect of it is kind of diminished, because now it's more focused on the end product, like making a high quality tattoo at the end of the day. So how you get from point A to point B isn't necessarily as important. I mean, I think in some instances it is, like when people get what I would call like a memento tattoo. Like, for example, this is a situation I was in. I did, if anybody watching is familiar with the military, you know what Ranger School is in the U.S. Army. And when you graduate from Ranger School, it's a big deal. At least it used to be. I don't know what the way things are now, but back in the day, it was a big deal because it's a really tough school to get through. And I did, on a group of 4 guys, I did Ranger tabs. You know, the tab says Ranger, you get pinned on you. Now, knowing what I know now, it might not have been wise for them to get those, you know, in their line of work. But anyway, they got it. And part of the experience was being all together, having not only made it through Ranger School and withstood the pain of that, but also together to celebrate and also have sort of a permanent lasting mark as to their connection, not just themselves, but their connection to Ranger School itself. And I mean, that's something to be proud of. It really is. I'm prior U.S. Army. I was in the U.S. Army, and completing Ranger School is a huge deal. And so when I tattooed that on these, I think it was 4 guys, every single one of them had a tough time, and they were all
really,
you know, worked up. Oh yeah, it was tough for them. I don't know why. Sometimes you can kind of work yourself up into a, you know, mentally. It's a more of a mental game, I think. But anyway, that being said, they all got it. So, and one of their buddies passed out. So,
really?
So not only,
I'm feeling kind of good about myself right now. Okay.
Oh yeah, no. To be quite honest, it's usually the big, not always, but oftentimes it's usually like the big tough guy that that taps out or can't deal with it. And sometimes it's the young girl. There's no type of person that sits through a tattoo better. Women tend to sit better, because biologically they sort of are able to deal with pain for obvious reasons a little better than men. But in general, I wouldn't say that if somebody passed out, I wouldn't say that means they're like a sissy or something, you know, because they had a physiological response to, you know, trauma. I mean, but that being said, those guys not only made it through Ranger School together, but they also have that experience. And one of their friends did something goofy that they can think back, and whenever they look at this tattoo, they can kind of remember that. And that, I think that's important. And that's one of the aspects of tattooing, along with, like I said earlier, different people who would fall into different groups, whether it's cultural or artistic or sports or ethnic or political, whatever your group is. There's imagery that people get tattooed over and over again. That, for example, like people that are into like gun rights or libertarianism or whatever, there's like a certain set of imagery that I've tattooed, you know, like the Gadsden flag. And then, you know, there's some other stuff too that they'll all get in their tattoos and their sleeves to tell people that they're patriots, or, you know. And then like if I tattoo someone who's like into hip hop, you know, there's imagery, there's urban imagery that has its roots in like Latino culture. That's a whole other side of tattooing in and of itself, that what I do has its roots in that, you know.
It's unifying, but it also identifies you with a certain.
Absolutely.
See, because I think I want to illustrate it, and I want to really emphasize it, because I think you supported my thesis again, because
right.
I want to tell real quick. I don't want to talk about me, but I want to share with you. I think you already know it, but I share with you my experience of tattooing, and I wonder if it's changed at all. But it sounds like, according to you, it hasn't. Maybe it's a little bit of a different form. No, when I first got interested in tattooing 30 years ago, it was pretty. I'm trying to think of the right word. It was fringe, I would say.
Right.
It certainly wasn't mainstream. There weren't a lot of tattooing artists around. I mean, now they're like, it's kind of like, I always say, like nail salons and tattoo artists. They're like all over the place. Like, dang,
yep.
How do these people make a living? But you know, I guess they do. So so when I got mine, it was much more fringe, and what you described earlier, kind of the not antisocial, but what's the kind of word? There was kind of there was a bit of a kink fetish kind of
Yeah.
quality to it that I liked. It was one of the reasons I liked the whole world of tattooing. But I mean, in the gay community where I was, I mean, it really, it was more mainstream in the gay community, the gay male community, than in the straight world. And
Really?
yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because like before I went to the gay community, I didn't see a lot of people with visible tattoos. You know, people the cliche was always that somebody in the military, you know, they got a tattoo, you know, and they came home and
Right.
they had a tattoo, but
Right.
of the anchor or something, you know, or a ship. But I never, and there was nobody around me or in my family or even in my acquaintances that had tattoos. No, when I went to the gay community, a lot of people had visible tattoos. Not necessarily if they were in the leather community or anything like that, but
Yeah.
and it very much so, I think for me marked a rite of passage, because the guys that did it kind
Yeah.
of, you know, looked like you a little bit. They had sleeves and beards and usually
Yeah.
some piercings. So to enter that world for me was very much a rite of passage, like it's described here, because
Right.
it involved pain, withstanding the pain, and you're publicly withstanding it. That's
Right.
why I kind of sarcastically said, "Well, these people wimped out." You know, I meant it in a way because that was very integral to my concept of tattooing.
What I will say though is you're 100% right, but at the same time, it's an illustration of how tattoo, when something becomes mainstream,
Yes.
elements like that totally kind of go away and they kind of get watered down. The pain thing, I'm not trying to discount that wasn't important, because it really was. Even when I first started tattooing, like, that was just part of the deal. If you wanted something, if you wanted to have a big tattoo on your arm,
Yep.
then back then, like you said, not a lot of people had them. And so if someone saw that, there's a reason why tough people, you know, tough guys had them, because it showed people that you could withstand pain and that you didn't care about society and you would do crazy things because you have tattoos, you know. Anyway, but when it,
go ahead.
when I was going to say, when it became mainstream, you had people that had no interest in that social aspect of it, that, you know, they when like they would be watching punk bands or, you know, whatever, even like heavy metal. You know, I've been into metal for ever since I was a kid, and to see metal go from completely fringe, you know, so even like black metal and death metal was super fringe, and now it's, I mean, it's still like fringe, but it's not like it. Like if I mentioned, if somebody, do you know who Cannibal Corpse is? Most people know who that band is, or they've seen the shirt or something like that. And anyone that was into that had tattoos. You know, it was, tattoos were something that connected you with a countercultural movement of some kind.
Yes.
Whether it's a 1%er biker, whether it's in the gay community, it was just sort of this common denominator of people who didn't quite fit in with what was perceived as, you know, conservative, uptight society, you know. Well, when conservative, uptight society became, when the counterculture has now become the conservative, uptight society, you know, the tables have sort of turned now. Tattooing has become mainstream. And so the more people that get it, the more watered down those important, I think, sociological aspects of it are kind of lost, because, you know, you add more to the pool and it just gets diluted. So there's still an element to that, but it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah. I mean, with like more traditional artists, just like a painter, the creative process is the process of creation.
Right.
That, I mean, that's where the passion is, and that's where the inspiration is. When it's done, when the painting is done, when it's dried and framed, most artists are like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Let's sell it. I don't want to see it. And I think tattooing is the same way. And tattooing is a weird kind of art form, because it's, you have an artist, but then you have somebody that's like the canvas, And it's weird. I can't think of another thing like it, because with me, because I have multiple tattoos. With me, once the tattoo was done and healed, it was kind of over. For me, it was the deciding what to get, working with the tattoo artist,
Right.
tweaking it, getting the design right, and then the build up, like and it was a communal thing, going and
Right.
with my friends, discussing it, talking about the pain, what it's going to be like, getting it. That was the interesting part of it, not the here it is.
No, what you just, yeah, I mean, you kind of zeroed in on why when people say, oh, it's addictive. It's not having the tattoo,
It
it's
is.
that it's addictive,
It is.
because it's a dopamine dump. It really is, because you become the center of attention for that moment.
Yep.
And all your friends are around, and you've picked something and everybody loves it. And I mean, back then especially, you had to be more, as a tattoo artist, you had to sort of be a kind of a character. You had to kind of have a personality or a nickname, or you had to be a character to stay busy, because that was part of it. Almost like that, it's kind of a holdover from the circus sideshow thing. American tattooing has its roots in circus sideshow. I won't go into all the history of it, but that would be an interesting topic too. But yeah, I mean, that's one aspect of it that you've zeroed in on, that is, I think, why it becomes addictive to people, because it's the total experience. And physiologically, when you get tattooed, your body releases natural opiates or whatever, dopamine or whatever, endorphins is the word I'm looking for, that oftentimes mimic the same feelings you would get from certain other illicit drugs. Not in the same way, but that reward pathway is established in your brain, even though it's kind of a mixed signal, because it hurts, and it's kind of like, it hurts, I don't want to do this. But because you're willingly subjecting yourself to it, you have this sense of accomplishment mixed with that endorphin dump, mixed with the applause of, you know what I mean by applause, like the admiration of people that you did it. There's all of these complexities going into it. And then you pile on top of it the fact that there are, like what you're talking about, sociological things that go on, where now you're more accepted. For example, if I were to go, like, way back in the day, before everyone had tattoos, I had my neck tattooed years and years ago, which was a huge deal back then.
It was very strange, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people would give you looks, and and back then I wanted that. I don't want it now. Like, that's something I don't want now. I mean, I've had laser removal done to kind of get away from that, but which is why I tell my kids, don't get tattooed. Wait till you're way older. Don't be like me and get a big stupid tattoo on your neck thinking you look awesome, and then years go by and you don't want to get stared at anymore, so you have to do laser removal. But anyway, yeah.
But Shayne, I don't think I wouldn't stare at that if I saw you. I would be like, I wouldn't even give it a second look.
Well, yeah, I mean, because now that's just I mean, it's not a big deal. Like, I don't get any odd, I'm not as tattooed as a lot of tattoo artists now, and I have my hands, arms, and, I had a tattoo here, but I had it fully removed. And then I've had removal done here, but that's a long story. But anyway, yeah, I mean, part of the payoff with getting a tattoo like this was the socially transgressive act. And I think, like what you're saying in the gay community, if you're a part of a community whose entire foundation is predicated upon being socially transgressive, well, obviously tattoos is going to come along with it. Maybe not with everybody, but that's just going to be par for the course. Drugs, tattoos, I mean, it can be the weirdest, darkest, leather bar. Yeah, it could be one of those, or you could be at, like I said, a Cannibal Corpse concert, and you'll see the exact same thing, but just in a different context. So yeah, I think you're really hitting on some fertile ground, sociologically speaking.
Well, one of the things too that while you were speaking, I was thinking of it is when you get a tattoo, you have to be very focused. You have to stay very still, and you have to be very disciplined when they're working on you. You really have to keep. It's almost like the Vulcans in Star Trek. You have to keep absolute control of your emotions because you have to stay still. You absolutely have to, and it's very, I find it really interesting.
No, it is. And and different, well, for example, Japanese style tattooing, it's not very common in North America, but you do have some people who do it the traditional way, hand poke. It's called tabori.
Wow.
And like, I use a machine, it's a machine that, it's got a motor on it and that, moves the needles up and down. Well, with tabori tattooing, it's a hand motion, and the needles are on a bar, and they're affixed to this bar, and it's this hand motion, and there's almost like this meditative like rhythm or something like that with the way it's done. It's this, and everything is sort of done in that way. There's some videos online if you look it up. It's very, very interesting. That's sort of the traditional way to do a Japanese tattoo, but you have to, if you get it done that way, there's like a certain way that you have to do things in a certain order. Even the kind of tattoos that I do, there's a certain order that I have to do things. And if the person isn't able to focus and deal with things, for each phase that we're going through, they're not going to end up with a tattoo at the end of the day. They'll end up with something half done. A lot of people do that. They'll get started on something and just not finish it because they get into it and they realize, I can't do something like this. It's a huge commitment. And we see more of that now because it is mainstream. And so everyone comes to the table, as opposed to people who are what I would consider a little more reckless. Tattoos used to be gotten by people who were reckless or lacked, not always, but had less, what's the terminology? High time preference or whatever. I forget. But anyway, yeah, I mean, now that more, for lack of a better term, normal, whatever that means, people get tattoos, all of the stuff that me and you have been talking about, it has sort of gone away. Like it's not as big of a part of tattooing. Now it's more people approach it like, okay, for example, way back when I first started tattooing, if someone came in to the shop that I worked at and spoke to one of us like they speak to us now, they would have literally been assaulted. Like some of the people I wouldn't have, but some of the people I've worked with would have knocked them out. I mean, I have stories that I won't share, but stories, that things I've witnessed. And tattooing used to be full of outlaws and people you didn't want to mess with. And most people that came into that shop knew you don't want to act a fool in here. Well, nowadays, I mean, people think it's like going to Burger King. Like if one little thing doesn't go their way, not everybody. I mean, occasionally we get something like this. I don't want to make it sound like everyone is like that now, but the incidence of people being a lot more demanding and approaching it like it's fast food is a lot higher. You never saw that back 15, 20 years ago, or further back. I mean, you would literally get assaulted. I mean, tattooers, there's a reason why they were considered outcasts and outlaws and rebels and, people you didn't want to, rough types you didn't want to mess with, because they were. There's a reason that stereotype exists. It's because it's true a lot of the times. But nowadays, I mean,
that was one of the reasons that drew me to it too. And I think a big plus for me with getting tattoos was the transgressive element, not only like socially within my group in the gay community, because I think I mean, just being there identified me with the group, but this went deeper, like in into your flesh. But then also just within my own like family dynamic, I knew it would piss off my father.
Yeah.
And yeah,
that's classic. I mean, that's just, I still hear that, like, oh man, my mom's going to be so mad. Even now, I mean, people say that all the time.
I want to get into this a little bit because I think it goes deep. But because I remember my mom and dad have a swimming pool. My dad's passed on, God rest his soul. But I remember the first day, because I was living in San Francisco and Berkeley. I remember the first day I came home and went swimming in their pool. And my dad saw I had tattoos, and oh my gosh, he was really, really super upset. And I was just like, part of me was like, I didn't care, but part of me was like, I'm so happy that he's upset.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, having a neck tattoo and knowing that like you made someone uncomfortable, or I don't know, you know, especially back then with like being younger and just thinking about things in such a stupid way, you know, thinking like, yeah, I'm pretty awesome, you know, yeah, I have, I don't know, I don't even know what the thought process was. You just having a tattoo like that, like everything we talked about, there's the stigma, that transgressive stigma that only people who are in biker gangs or who are bad people get this. So if you have a bunch of visible tattoos back then, people would automatically assume things about you. And in certain situations, you might want them to assume those things about you so that you didn't have to be in other situations where you might get found out that you weren't this like, you know, super tough guy or whatever like that. So for me, that was part of it, because I've never been like the kind of guy that likes to get in fights or anything like that. But having a bunch of tattoos, I mean, that really helps insulate you from even being in those situations a lot of the time. At least back then it did. Now, not so much, but back then that was part of it. I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. So
yeah, even I have to say, even in the back then, I don't want to speak for now because I don't know, but even back then in the gay community, you could have like a typical macho guy with a lot of tattoos. And that would be like, well, yeah, that's the kind of guy he is. He's like a tough macho guy. But then you could have somebody maybe like me who is more slender, and you would almost have sort of the same conception. This guy can take it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, it's, and you know, some of the circles I ran in, you know, playing music and stuff like that too, that was part of the uniform. And having tattoos, a neck tattoo, it was just part of the uniform, part of the package, you know what I mean? I hate to say it, but you know, because most people who run in those circles that are creative or musicians, like they like to think that they're very individualistic and they express themselves. I mean, but at the end of the day, it's more or less a uniform. Like there are certain things that you can adorn yourself with, and certain clothes you wear, and it's an identity essentially. And tattooing, part of the reason I tell my kids to wait to get tattooed if they're going to, is for that obvious fact that a tattoo is a long-term commitment. You know, like you can get a tattoo removed, but it's just definitely not something that is easily done. And I don't know, it's like I said earlier, you have to, if you're okay with wearing the same pair of jeans for the rest of your life, then get a tattoo. Just make sure you choose some like pair of jeans that has some perennial, you know, value.
I don't even look at mine anymore. I'm like, oh yeah. Sometimes I'll see it and go, oh, it's there. Real quick, there's a couple of quotes I want to read real quick. I think I've read it on another podcast. Might have even been with the one with you. But this is Camille Paglia. So she wrote this around, I'm going to guess, around 1992, probably around when I was getting my tattoos. She wrote, masculinity is risky and elusive. It is achieved by a revolt from woman, and it is confirmed only by other men. This is a really interesting book, too. This had a big influence on me back in the early 90s. And he wrote this around the same time. I think this was 1990. I mean, he talks a lot about, I shouldn't say talks a lot about it. He mentions the idea of initiation rites, and he talks about the nuclear family here. And he said the fault of the nuclear family today isn't so much that it's crazy. It's that the family no longer offers an effective way for the son to break his link with his parents without doing harm to himself, which is really interesting. I think, and I think you kind of confirmed my theories. Again, I said that, but I wonder, I'll ask you real quick. I wonder if it's not so much the process that I think is so much an initiation rite in tattooing, but maybe now it's more the subject matter of the tattoo.
Nowadays?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's again, I've said this 100 times, it's because of the broad demographic that's getting tattooed. That's why that's changed. It's not the pain, physical aspect, and some of the things we touched on earlier about going with your friends and, you know, having it be sort of a social thing that you get some kind of value out of it that way. That's still around. We have a guy at our shop who just does small, like, memento tattoos on college girls and stuff like that. You know, there'll always be that, you know. And there's still a little.
Real quick, Shayne. Do men tend to get tattoos that are visible and women tend to get ones that are not? That's been my impression. That's been my impression. Like, women will get like little ankle tattoo, like a rosebud or something, that's not as visible, and men will tend to get a bigger tattoo on the arm or something that's more visible.
I would say yes, but the way gender is perceived now, and how I don't agree with it, but culturally how gender is sort of becoming fluid, and some of these expectations as far as how women should look or whatever, how that's just kind of being turned into this gobbledygook and you can kind of do whatever. That expectation that men would get more visible tattoos is it's starting to be kind of a 50-50 thing. But I will say it just depends on what it is. Women tend to want to get stuff that's more ornamental.
Yeah.
You know, that's more, everything's evenly done, you know, like they're women tend to get stuff that's flatters their curves, you know, stuff that's laid out a certain way, feminine.
You know, see, that's interesting, because I know there are supposed to be no male and females, you know, there's no male female, you know, everything is the same. But it's interesting because I think even me, who is a gay guy, and I wasn't the most macho gay guy, I got pretty rugged tattoos. I got knights and I got Celtic crosses and all this stuff. Yeah. And I got dudes with swords and all this stuff. You know, where men tend to get more masculine images and women tend to get butterflies and angels and flowers. Yeah. Is that true?
Oh, that's absolutely 100% true. And it's like women, a lot of women tend to get, you know, they get flowers. That's something that's, you know, when you see repeated imagery in tattooing, it's not a bad thing. Oftentimes people will come in and say, I want something totally original. And then I'll tell them, don't get a tattoo, because somebody out there has whatever you want to get. You know, get something you want to get. Not even if 1 million people have it, if it's important to you, then get it. A gazillion people have cross tattoos, but, you know, Christianity is important to them. So just because something's, you know, popular doesn't mean that necessarily it's a negative thing. But as far as women and the sort of tattoos they get, there's definitely a certain aesthetic, no matter what the subject matter is. So there is a style of tattooing. They're mandalas. And it's loosely based around geometric patterns that repeat. It's really popular right now. And a lot of women get that stuff, or they get things that, if something seems feminine, then you'll see it in a tattoo, and something that will definitely help to focus more on a woman's, like the good aspects of her figure. A lot of women want to take that into account when they're getting a tattoo, or maybe they don't like. I don't want to say that they come in and say, I want to make sure that aesthetically this follows the anatomy. They don't say that, but I can tell by talking to them, by the subject matter reference that they bring in, I can tell that that's the direction they're going. So most of my clientele is male. I have some female clientele, but if anybody here ends up going to look at my tattooing, you'll see why I do high contrast, black and gray realism tattooing. And so it tends to appeal more to men. That's just how it is. But yeah, I mean, our society can say whatever they want, and they can redefine and relativize and be hypercritical about this or that and say that men are this, you know, whatever. But at the end of the day, women like what women like, and men like what men like. And there's some crossover there. But I can tell you, even when I get, for some reason, and I don't know why, I tattoo a lot of lesbians, a lot. Like I have a lot of lesbian clients. They're all
Must
great.
be-
I love all of them.
That's because a number of lesbians have tattoos.
They're all sweet. I love every single one of them. But yeah, I mean, I tattoo men and lesbians. I don't tattoo very many women or homosexual men. I just don't, you know. So, and we have guys at our shop that do, and it's because the way that their tattooing looks has a certain aesthetic that appeals to someone who might be a little more feminine, whether you're male or female or whatever, that appeals to them. So, I mean, all of that stuff, these are all unspoken things too. I can't say that enough. People don't come in and say these things, or if they do, they say it in a different way. Like most people don't think about it to that degree. And that's not a knock on the people getting tattooed. It's just that most people just say, I want to get an angel, or I like mandalas. Yeah. And especially when you get a big tattoo, the worst possible thing you can do, and anyone thinking about getting a big tattoo, this is the most important bit of advice I can give you from a tattoo artist perspective. If you're going to go get a large tattoo, even a small tattoo, but if you're going to get a big tattoo like a sleeve or a chest piece or whatever you're going to get, the first thing you do is you do some research about the person or the type of tattoo that you want to get. If you want to get a black and gray tattoo of the Archangel Michael, you don't want to go to the guy that does these like goofy, cartoony, full color, because it's like going to a Mexican restaurant and ordering pizza. They might be able to throw it together for you, but it's not going to be the same as if you went to the place that's famous for doing pizza, right? So that's the first bit of advice. Go to the appropriate artist. Look into what they do and find someone that does what you want to have done. Second, make sure you have sort of an idea of the content you want, but make it a little loose, because one thing I can tell you that is a guarantee is that you're going to have to compromise on what you want, because oftentimes people that when they want to get a big tattoo, they don't, there's certain limitations, and I can't do certain things that people want to do. And if I did do them, that I would be doing that person a disservice, right? And they're not going to know that. It's just like the analogy I use is, let's say you want a home and you want to replace the roof. You're going to do, if you're smart, you'll do some research on a good contractor, someone that specializes in roofing. You'll call the best or the person that you think is the best for the job. You'll hire them. You might even pick out the shingles. But the minute you go up the ladder to where they're working and tell them in what order to put the shingles down and how to do it, you're going to make them upset, and your roof's not going to turn out well. You're not going to get a professional job. So if you go into a tattoo with a hyper controlling personality and you're telling the artist, no, I want this, I want that, at the end of the day, you're not going to get a good tattoo. You're not going to get as good of a tattoo as that artist can do. So you have to relinquish some of this control, and it can be scary. But if we go all the way back to rule number one, which is to do your due diligence and your research, if you find someone who has a portfolio that reflects what you want to do, you can take your hands off the wheel, because you know for a fact they've proven themselves that they can handle what you're wanting. And it's not going to turn out exactly like you thought, but no art does. When I do an icon or a painting commission, it never turns out exactly like the person has imagined. If that's what you want, then I tell people, if you want something that is a reproduction of a photo, then you need to just use the photo. Right? You know, because we're not working with paintings here. It's the same with a tattoo. So the artist is also going to get really annoyed with you. You might not show it, but the artist is going to get really annoyed because you're stepping on their toes, and all they're trying to do is provide you with the best possible tattoo they can give you. So you can get your money's worth, and you can end up with something that the end goal is to exceed your expectations as a client, and to conceptualize and execute a tattoo that not only they're proud of, but that will stand the test of time. Because as you know, you have tattoos that are a few years old. A tattoo will morph and change, and the human body changes, you know.
Tell me about it.
So all of these things
people need to consider that too, is when they get old, and everybody gets old, it's gonna look that great.
Yeah. No,
unless they want to get them retouched. I ran into the guy that did some of my tattoos a few years ago, and he's like, "Oh, Joe, you know," and he didn't remember them. He remembered me, but he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, and he was still working. He was kind of, at that time, he was easy now, and and I think he was working like part-time. And he's like, "Oh, come in and I'll retouch them." And I was like, "Oh, you know, no thing."
Yeah, sounds like a good idea, but then you're like, I got to sit through all that again. So yeah, I don't. That's just my general advice, and I didn't mean to sound like condescending or like preachy about it, but that's general advice to anyone considering getting a tattoo. If you operate in that way, find someone who does the kind of tattooing you want to do. Go and tell them what you want to have done, and let them do their thing. You will 100% of the time you'll leave there with your mind blown, and you'll have something that's money well spent. At the end of the day, tattoos are expensive. Part of the reason they're expensive is because it's the only thing that you can buy that no one can steal from you.
They work.
If you do your due diligence and you get it done correctly by someone who's a professional that knows what they're doing, that's something that is designed to last you for the rest of the time that you're on this earth. And you can't take it into the next world, but you can take it into the ground. You can sort of take it with you when you die. It will go with you into that casket. So that's part of the reason why tattoos are so expensive. It's the one thing you can buy that will go with you the rest of your life. So why not do some research and make sure the person that's doing it knows what they're doing?
Yeah. Back when I got, there was probably about 10 tattoo artists in San Francisco that I was like comfortable with.
There's like 10,000 now, isn't there?
Yeah, there was probably about, I'm sure there were more, but there was about 10 that I liked, that I had to really choose from, and I settled on.
Where did you go? Do you remember?
I just walked into a tattoo parlor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The only one there's a lot of iconic ones in San Francisco, like Tattoo City.
No, it wasn't famous. No, it wasn't famous. No, actually,
Okay.
It was. Yeah, he was just working. I think he was the only one in his tattoo parlor at the time.
Yeah.
So.
Was it kind of in Skid Row?
Yeah, it wasn't in the greatest part. It wasn't in the Castro, no, but it wasn't in the greatest part of town. But it was near where I'm taking a deep dive now. It was more near where like the leather community and the BDSM community hung out. So it was, at that time, it was still associated with the
makes sense,
the fetish stuff. I remember the first time I went to like a tattoo was at the Cow Palace, like in the 90s, like a tattoo convention.
Oh, convention?
I mean, yeah, it was a whole different scene. It was really
in the 90s? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the 90s.
Yeah. Oh, it was the Wild West. Stuff was crazy back then. Yeah.
And it was completely different. It was not mainstream. I kept you too long. One of the things I want to talk about real quick.
Yeah.
You mention it because this is something I got into, because for me, tattooing in the end wasn't extreme enough. And then I got into piercing.
Yeah.
Which like you were right. The tattoo artist that I did not do piercing. And then he did send me to a guy who did piercing, but he would only do certain types of piercings.
Yeah.
Now, the type of piercing I had, more conventional like my ears, and I don't want to get into it, but I had to go to somebody else to do the other kind of piercing. And those have become more mainstream. Now, back then they were completely out there.
Yeah. It's
completely out there.
Like I said about the piercing thing. I mean, and then they do the suspensions where
yes.
Do you know what that is?
Oh, yes.
The suspensions.
I did not do that. Yes, but I know exactly.
Yeah, I'll spare the audience what that is. If you're really interested, there's a thing called Google, and you can look up what suspensions are. But a lot of it is connected to, like, for example, coming back full circle to the verse in Leviticus. When it talks about that sort of thing, and I said earlier, no one comes to me and says, "Will you cut my body for the dead?" I mean, when you get into that realm of the tattoo industry, that's why I said it's kind of degrees. It's just like everything. There's these degrees. The industry that I operate in, there's a lot of Christians. There's tons of Christians. I know a ton of Christians, evangelicals. I know Catholics that tattoo. I know there's a few Orthodox. Like, there are people. I mean, you can say that in anything. I mean, there's people in the gay community that are Catholic or whatever, But I understand that side of it too. But there's a sort of a normality to it now, where I operate in an industry that I essentially am a graphic artist for people who, instead of drawing something on paper for them, they want me to apply to their body. And that's quite literally it. You have on the other end of the spectrum, this, again, more countercultural community of people into body modification. And they'll like cut their ears off, split their tongues, do really bizarre things that most people in my end of the pool find revolting and are completely against. I don't personally know. I know a lot of people from just being in the industry a long time. I don't know a single tattooer who is okay with that. So who I don't want to say they're against it, but who wants to be around that. Let's just put it that way. And that kind of comes with the territory. Now, not with all piercing, because there are shops that do piercing that won't do anything below the belt. You know, they might do the upper body, they might do certain things, but even back then when you experienced that, there were different degrees of extreme that people would do. And then you get into people doing branding or scarring or literally amputating parts of their body. And it's just
like, for instance, because I have a clean show. For instance, when I got my tongue pierced in the 90s, that was completely bizarre.
Yeah. Well, and it meant something. There was something.
And now I got my eyebrow pierced. That was completely bizarre. People were like, what the hell is that? Now it's
the
not.
tongue
now
thing, like young kids get their tongue pierced. And I'm like, do you know what the root of that is? Like what that meant? Like, I'm not going to say it obviously on the show. People can
I know.
I know, but yeah, I mean, people can kind of draw their conclusions since this is a G-rated show, but that's the roots.
No,
PG. Okay, well, we'll do PG. But yeah, we'll just put it there. So now, like, people, yeah, I see young kids, and it's like, that's not. You shouldn't be letting your 12 or 13-year-old. Anyone that pierces a 13-year-old's tongue, to me, is just, yeah, that's immoral in my opinion. But
I'll make it again. I'm going to wind down. I'll make it again. This is the argument I've kind of made. I think in society, especially, I'll just use the family. I think as fatherhood and the role of men and fathers has sort of declined, I think you tend to see an increase in this kind of stuff: tattooing, piercing, body modifications. Probably less so, maybe. Although, I mean, after my discussion with you, I maybe my idea has kind of shifted a little bit. Maybe not so much in the process of tattooing, but in the subject matter, where I think it does tend. I think people are looking to identify with a group and find their own identity, and I think they can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I think in the Middle Ages, I think when you started, I don't want to get philosophical, but I think when in the Middle Ages, when you started to see society start to decline a bit, oh, this is interesting. I just thought of this. So specifically, this happened during the Black Plague, and here we're just coming out of COVID, or supposedly, you saw an increase in flagellation and the flagellants. I think there was, and I think that's playing out a bit now too. I think people have this desire. I think modern society is so disassociating that I think they have a desire to feel some sort of reality. And if it's pain, I think tattooing in some respects is a modern form of flagellation. Maybe I'm looking too much into it because that's the way it was for me. But
well, I think you're right, and I don't think people intentionally do these things. I just think it's sort of a natural response to some of this stuff. Like I said about the Viking, when I was talking about the Viking tattoos, I didn't mean to pick on anyone that has Viking tattoos, but that seems to be a common one that people get when they want to express some kind of connection with their roots. And that's sort of a revolt against the modern world, or a rebellion against modernity, saying that we all have to be, like, it's somehow wrong to have some kind of connection with our ethnic identity if you're a certain group. And so I don't want to go down that road for obvious reasons, but I know personally that the Viking thing and the Norse stuff is definitely a way that some of these guys are able to connect with those roots without people misinterpreting it, because everything is so, I mean, some people will or whatever, but everything is just so controversial that, that's a way for them to connect with that. But there are other people, like you said, the flagellation thing, you'd think that when people say they want to get scars covered up, oftentimes you'd think it would be like women like if they get stretch marks from birth. That's a real common one that people like to get women like to get covered up, because they get self-conscious, and I understand. Or sometimes people will get a scar covered up from like a surgery. The number one thing that's requested as far as scar cover up is cutting. People cut on their arms, and these aren't just like people doing it for attention. I would, in my career, I've probably covered up over 100 forearms with major scarring, like deep major scarring, and covered it up with various things. I think probably one of the most poetic things that I covered up scars, forearm scars with, were I did a version. I did the section of the creation of Adam by Michelangelo, the hands touching.
Wow!
I did that on this girl's forearm over those scars, and I don't know if she intended that. Like when I look at it now, I'm like, that's pretty professional. I don't think she intended that. Maybe she did. She didn't tell me. But I look at it now, and that the hand of God reaching down and reaching up the hand of man, and there's these scars from when she was hopeless or whatever, and deep, cut her arms pretty deeply, and I covered it with that. You could still kind of see the scars, and so, I mean, I don't know. There is an element to that, I think. Just like when people, I don't want to say act out. I can't really think of any other word for it, but when people are trying to grasp at something transcendent, I don't know, maybe we are getting a little too ethereal about it. I don't know. Most of the time people just want something that looks cool.
But yeah, true. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I think you can do this. I think you can maybe make a point too, with maybe not so much something that's so ethnic. But I remember in the 90s, like just like a generic tribal tattoo or a barbed wire around bicep. I mean, that was a tip that I saw as a very typical like masculine identifier that men would
absolutely get. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, it still kind of is. Tribal is sort of passe. Some people still get it, but most people kind of stay away from it just because it's kind of dated. But yeah, tattoos in general are masculine. It's just something that even the feminine ones, they're masculine. And like what you were saying, if you dig into the roots of tattooing from a anthropological perspective, tattooing almost never had anything to do with just looking cool. In our culture it does, but it always had a depth. There's always a depth to the reason why people would go to such extremes to modify how their body looked, and it always was a religious or cultural rite of passage or whatever. Our culture now, you could say that it does have that same meaning. As someone who's been in the tattoo industry a long time, I will say that it can, but generally speaking, it doesn't. Maybe it does, but it's more subconscious. There are people that do it for that reason, and quite a few. But as a whole, like in a macro sense, most of the time it's just done for cosmetic reasons. People want to look cool or fit in with whatever consumer tribe that they want to belong to. You have the CrossFit people, and they get their certain kind of tattoos, and then you have it's literally a consumer tribes. And I'm not making a value judgment on that, because that's how I make my living. And since we're nearing the end, I will say I have neither confirmed nor denied that whoever's watching, should get a tattoo. If you're taking advice from me, then that's wrong. You're doing it wrong. You need to talk to your priest or your spiritual advisor or your professor, and
your spouse too, maybe.
Or your spouse. Yeah, don't get guidance about this from me or anybody else except those who are directly involved in your life. So
do you have just a few minutes, Shayne?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is a really great book.
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk about him more later on. I'm working on a project. This is from Father Seraphim Rose, Nihilism, the Root of the Revolution of the Modern Age. I was reading this in another context, but I thought this was important because I think it, what's the right word? I think it helps illustrate some of the points we're making. Father Seraphim, in this book about nihilism, he talked about mutation and the transformation of human nature. And he wrote, this is the nihilist man. He is the rootless man, discontinuous with a past that nihilism has destroyed. The raw material of every demagogue's dream, the free thinker and skeptic, closed only to the truth, but open to each new intellectual fashion, because he himself has no intellectual foundation. The seeker after some new revelation, ready to believe anything new, because true faith has been annihilated in him. I just thought this, I don't know, I thought this was revealing, because I don't know, I don't want to talk bad about, I mean, I have tattoos, but I don't want to talk about people that have them,
right?
You know, make them or anything. But I think it reveals a deeper societal problem. I think people are, I mean, maybe now it has just become cosmetic. Like, what shade of lipstick are you wearing, or what, how you paint your nails. But I don't know. I think it does reveal something, an emptiness.
It does. No, it absolutely 100% does.
I'm glad you're
okay. No, I do. I totally do. I'm in a weird place, because that's why I sort of try to be, I don't want to appear to be just like I'm riding the fence and being like dodging and like, I don't know if it's wrong. I don't know. Like, if I wasn't a tattoo artist, or this is a better way to put it. If I was sitting down and having a conversation with, let's pick three of my favorite Orthodox saints. My patron saint, St. John of San Francisco, wow. Saint Seraphim of Sarav,
yeah,
and let's just say Father Seraphim Rose, okay, wow. Who I consider saint. But if I was sitting down and talking to them and saying, hey, do you think tattooing is moral? Do you think tattooing is beneficial? Do you think tattooing is something that everyone should be doing like they're doing now? What do you think all of them will say?
I think they would all say
no. I think every single one, every single St. Paisios, they would all say no. Okay, so for me, I'm in a weird place because yes, do I think, like, if I could just walk away from tattooing right now and paint iconography and just do that, then I would. And to be honest, that's sort of the plan. But the guidance given to me by my spiritual father was, you need to do this in a way, you need to let God open these doors and make your transition out with wisdom. Okay. And that's a personal thing between me and my spiritual father and God. Okay. But outside of myself, as a tattoo artist, in summary, I will say, anyone who's at home watching this, who's sitting there thinking that they're better than anybody that gets a tattoo, you're doing it wrong. Okay. You don't know. I know. And I know that I'll just be upfront. Most of the time, we have someone in the shop who's being, not most of the time, but a lot of the time, someone that's being not a very nice person to deal with. Oftentimes they're getting a Bible verse or something related to Christianity. That's happened more times than I can count. Okay. And I'm saying that to myself as well as a Christian. Okay. So if you're sitting there and making these wide sweeping judgments about individuals and them getting tattoos and this and that, if you're hung up on it as an issue, then you've totally missed the point. Okay. If you're someone who's watching this, trying to look for reasons why you should get a tattoo and trying to convince yourself to get a tattoo, then you're doing it wrong. That's not the point of this conversation. And you're looking for that confirmation in the wrong spot. You're not going to find it on YouTube. You're only going to find it in your prayer corner, and talking to your confessor or whoever you've willfully subordinated yourself to spiritually. That's it. That's where that line is drawn. And we can argue all day long about how bad it is. If it's bad, you're going to get a million different opinions. You're going to get a million priests that say, maybe not a million. You're going to get a lot of priests that say, we don't have that many. You're going to get a lot of priests that say it's not a big deal. Move on. Like, maybe you shouldn't get one, but if you do, don't worry about it. You're going to get a lot of priests that will, clutch their pearls and think it's the end of the world, and that's okay. Okay, but it shouldn't be an issue we all get hung up on. And if someone comes to your parish, especially if you're at a Catholic parish or an Orthodox parish that's super traditional, like, please don't treat those people like crap. Don't, I've had great experiences. I've had some really gnarly experiences, to the point where I had an experience once many years ago. I won't say if it's Catholic or Orthodox, but I had an experience that while I was in an Orthodox parish, I can't tell the story without being honest. And it really made, my wife has a bunch of tattoos too, and it almost made her not want to come into the Orthodox church.
Well,
so
hey, yeah.
All in all, and I mean, I've been to a few what would be considered traditional Catholic parishes and gotten the side eye from some, not everyone, but from some people. And yeah, like I said earlier, there's a stigma that comes with tattooing. So I get it. And when you mark your body with a bunch of skulls and stuff, you need to expect that people are going to treat you a little different. But when you come into a parish and you experience that over and over again, like, I guess all I'll say is don't try not to treat people that look that way a certain way that you might initially want to treat them, because you don't know who those people are. You don't know who that guy is or that woman is. You don't know what they know. They might be a saint, So, yeah.
That's because,
in summary,
yeah. That's because people, going back, I'll reemphasize it. That's because people, I think it's the failure of the family and fatherhood. But vis-a-vis, as I think the family fails, I think the church has failed too, is that I think people are lost, and I think they're looking for something. They're looking for cohesion. They're looking for order. They're looking for identity and community. And I mean, I know when I first went to the trad Catholic world 20 years ago, it was really trad. And I mean, people had a minivan, and, the men were there, were a lot of times younger, married with 5, 6 kids. All the women wore like long dresses, and it was a certain look. And boy, when I showed up, I didn't have that look. I mean, because at that time I still had piercings and, the ears, not my nose, but I still had the ears and everything. Yeah, people were kind of like, not rude, but yeah, I felt really out of place.
Suspicious. And in some ways I understand that. Suspicious is a good word. I understand it and I fully expect it, but I can tell you that I've tattooed those like gutter punk kids you see on the street begging for money that are all dirty with their squatter flap and their whatever, their patches all over. Every single one of those kids, almost every single one of those kids, I should say, has been abused in some way. Okay, I've known a ton of those people throughout my entire life, and I can't think of a single one that I've known in any great depth who hadn't been molested or grown up in a terrible family or had addiction issues. People that tattoo their face and do that stuff, like, for example, Mike Tyson's a good example. Okay, I recently watched a Mike Tyson documentary, and around the time he got his face tattooed, do you know why he got his face tattooed? Because he said, I don't like looking at myself in the mirror, and I wanted to do something. He wanted to do something to hurt himself.
He had a very, very rough childhood.
Absolutely.
The one guy, what was his name? Gus D'Amato was his first boxing coach, and he was like a father figure. Wasn't like a father figure. He was a father figure to him.
Was, yeah.
When he died, that's kind of when Mike Tyson's career and trajectory kind of went off the rails.
Yeah. You summed it up. I mean, we started talking about, hey, is tattooing okay? And then we ended up with, and most conversations end up with like, yeah, I think there's a fatherhood crisis. I mean, and I hate saying, I know maybe some of my clients will watch this, or yeah, whatever, people I've done iconography for, or whatever, but mostly people who I've done tattoos on might watch this, and I don't know, if you're in the tattoo industry and you're not a cheerleader, like fully behind it, oftentimes you can be seen as kind of a Benedict Arnold, or, you know, like if you're not affirming about everything about tattooing and it as a culture, then you're often seen as an outsider. And I've always kind of been an outsider even in the tattoo industry, but you're seen as someone who's not on board with whatever the direction it's going. So I don't know. Personally, yeah, I'm definitely morally conflicted about it. I'm not going to lie, but
I think a lot of things are relative. I know that just in my own circle and in my ministry, is it when, specifically with young people, this was a sign, I think, that things were not going well, is that when I saw young people and the tattoos started to multiply,
right,
things were not going well. That was a sign to me. It's not for everybody, but I think for certain people, I think it is. I think I don't want to say it's a cry for help. That sounds so passé, but I think
it's getting to the point now where people aren't getting images; they're just tattooing themselves black. Yeah. Like I mean, I can send you some links to stuff. There are people who they get a bunch of tattoos and it's not enough, and then they black out, literally black out. That sounds crazy, but they black out their entire body, and then they start cutting themselves to make scars on it, and then tattooing on the black. It's just this excessiveness, and it's definitely a symptom of our progressive society. Everything's progressing, but to what end? What is it progressing to? Oftentimes things progress to, you know, bad ends, and that's one of them.
It's the argument that I've made about the gay male community, is that for somebody that's at a loss, there's fertile ground to get really lost there. And I think in the realm of tattooing, I think that's also a possibility.
100%.
I think you can really go overboard, and I think there's people that will support it and help you along the way.
Yeah. It's like, I think the same kind of base neuroses that is in the gay community is also in every kind of socially transgressive counterculture. It's the same exact. It's just the symptoms manifest differently. I mean, I'm not trying to reduce it and say it's all connected, you know, but I think what you were talking about, that passage in Father Seraphim's book, that book is so, you can read it over and over and over again, and there's things that'll stick out in every other situation or any kind of context, like any different context, like the gay thing, the LGBT thing, where now it's LGBT is this national holiday for an entire month, where it used to just be something you mentioned under your breath or whatever to be supportive. Now you have to like support it. And now it's progressed in the tattoo industry where it's becoming normalized to sit and just like tattoo black, which is totally nihilistic. There's not even an image. It's just destroying your body with black pigment, which is so stupid and such a waste. There's no artistic, there's no excuse that it's art. It's just, you're just self-destructing. And you want everyone to know. So that's why you're doing that. So I don't know.
Yeah. I recommend, to close, I recommend this book. I think the mark of a timeless work of art, whether it's a painting or sculpture or book, is that it continues to speak to new generations. And he wrote this, it was published, I think, after his death, but he was originally writing this in the 1960s.
Yeah, it was a part of a larger work that he was
doing. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I recommend that book. Thank you so much, Shayne, for you took a lot of time with us.
It's all right. I had a blast. Anytime.
God bless you. Thank you so much, Shayne.
You too. Thanks for having me.